Australia is facing an underground market growing faster and spreading wider than most people realise. Behind normal streets and ordinary shop fronts, illegal cigarettes, loose tobacco and disposable vapes have been moving in volumes that don't match everyday trade. In just the last couple of years, the Australian Border Force recorded 23,000 illicit tobacco detections, blocking 2.53 billion cigarette sticks, 435 tonnes of loose tobacco, and more than 6 million vapes, preventing over $4.36 billion in lost revenue. Western Australia has become one of the key flashpoints. Do police still lack the power to shut these shops down immediately? And how a market this large is operating right in front of police teams without being noticed at all. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. The first signs didn't look like the start of a major case. They looked like ordinary hiccups in the system, parcel movements at strange hours, bank activity that didn't line up with declared income, and freight logs that hinted at extra weight moving through routine routes. But by September 2025, those small inconsistencies had piled up enough for investigators to take a closer look. What seemed like harmless blips began forming a chain stretching across Perth's southern suburbs and into the southwest. The early work was quiet, no raids, no alarms, just investigators comparing records and noticing the same names brushing past the same locations too often to ignore. A storage unit rented by someone with no reason to need one. Courier deliveries that didn't fit the size of the businesses they were tied to. Vehicles making short, repeated trips between suburbs without corresponding invoices or bookings. On their own, none of it proved anything. Together, it started to look like a system operating just beneath the surface of everyday life. By October, teams were pulling phone metadata, studying freight patterns and running financial checks to see who was moving what and how often. That's when the picture sharpened. The activity wasn't random. It wasn't sloppy. It had rhythm. It had structure. And it pointed to a network moving untaxed tobacco and vape products through quiet communities under the cover of normal routines. Investigators waited until the threads connected cleanly. Then, before sunrise, on January 15th, 2026, the quiet monitoring ended. Coordinated teams moved through Mandurah, Eaton, Bunbury, and several storage sites at the same time. Doors were open under warrant. Devices were seized before messages could be deleted. And 3 people, a 47-year-old woman, her 68-year-old father, and her 26-year-old son-in-law, were taken into custody at separate locations. One of them was stopped inside a shopping centre after refusing to unlock his phone. What began as scattered data points had now become a fully active investigation, and investigators were about to learn how far this operation reached. Now let's look closely at the family at the centre of this unfolding case, and the roles each one played. When investigators finally stepped inside the homes linked to the case, the surprise wasn't in what they found. It was in who they found. There were no aliases, no hidden fugitives, no group of strangers operating from the shadows. Instead, the centre of the investigation pointed to a single family living across quiet suburbs in Western Australia. A mother, her father, a son-in-law. 3 people whose daily routines looked no different from anyone else's. Inside a home in Eaton, officers searched the bedroom of 47-year-old Ziana Kanju. What they uncovered said more than any interview could. Bundles of cash, roughly $240,000, sat beside a cash counting machine, the kind commonly used when money moves faster than it can be recorded. Nothing was concealed behind false walls or buried in garages. It was sitting in a place meant for rest, not business, which made its presence even more telling. Further north in Koodanup, officers arrested 68-year-old Brian Tanzo, Kanju's father. His home held an even larger amount, about $800,000 in cash, stored alongside 2 more counting machines and a collection of suspected illicit tobacco. The volume alone shifted the investigation from possible involvement to clear operational role, suggesting he was connected to larger movement and storage than his quiet street would ever hint at. The youngest of the trio, 26-year-old Ahmad El Ahmad, was approached inside a crowded Bunbury shopping centre. When he refused to unlock his phone, officers detained him under lawful direction. A later search of his Australian residence revealed more illicit cigarettes and vaping products, hinting at a role linked to movement, handling or distribution. the practical work that keeps an operation running. Their first appearance in the Perth Magistrates Court added another layer. All three were granted bail under strict conditions: no communication with each other, no travel outside Western Australia, and controlled access to electronic devices. Kanju required a $50,000 surety, while Tanzo was ordered to report regularly due to health concerns. What emerged was a portrait of a family living two parallel lives, ordinary on the surface and deeply entangled beneath it. And once investigators followed the money, the full scope of what was inside those properties became impossible to ignore. When officers entered the properties on 15th January 2026, the scenes inside didn't resemble family homes or casual storage. They looked like the back end of a commercial operation, hidden behind everyday walls. Each address added another layer, turning what began as a quiet investigation into a clear picture of a network running far more product and far more money than anyone expected at first glance. Inside a Mandurah residence, investigators uncovered close to $800,000 in cash packed into bags and tucked inside safes. 2 cash counting machines sat nearby, the kind used when cash moves in quantities too large to tally by hand. It was the type of setup seen in high turnover environments, not in a suburban home, surrounded by normal neighbourhood routines. In Eton, the pattern repeated. Roughly $240,000 was found beside a bed next to yet another counting machine. None of it matched the lifestyle described by neighbours. The money wasn't hidden in panic. It was stored like part of a system, organised, accessible and ready to be cycled again. But the cash alone didn't tell the full story. Across the homes and 3 storage units, investigators tallied about 5 tonnes of loose tobacco, sealed in shrink wrap, boxed in bulk and labelled for handling. This wasn't the amount someone stashes for quiet side sales. This was inventory, prepared for ongoing distribution. Nearby, officers found close to 30,000 disposable vapes, stacked in branded packaging. The volume made one thing clear: this operation wasn't built around a single product. It was capturing different corners of the black market demand, tobacco for some, vapes for others, all feeding the same revenue stream. The digital evidence added the final pieces. Phones, a laptop, and stored data were taken for forensic analysis. Packing materials, thermal labels, and freight slips pointed to coordinated movement, not coincidence. Nothing investigators documented looked improvised or temporary. The spaces were structured, stocked, and maintained like a miniature supply chain disguised within ordinary life. And if the scale of the haul raised concerns, the economics behind it revealed something even more. To understand why networks like this operate at such scale, you have to follow the numbers, because in Australia, tobacco isn't just expensive, it's one of the most heavily taxed products in the country. A single legal pack can climb well past $40, putting it far out of reach for many smokers. That price pressure creates a gap, and in that gap, the black market thrives. Illicit tobacco products don't carry excise stamps. They aren't processed through regulated channels, and because they bypass every layer of taxation, they can be sold for a fraction of the legal price while still turning a major profit. This difference isn't small. It's the backbone of an underground industry worth billions in avoided duty each year. When border teams seize tons of illegal tobacco, they're not just removing product. They're intercepting revenue that criminal groups count on, and the amounts recovered in 2024 to 25 alone reflected a level of activity far beyond small-scale smuggling. Vapes have only accelerated this economy. With strict rules on legal nicotine vaping products, a huge portion of what circulates in communities comes through unregulated channels. These devices aren't taxed, aren't quality tested, and often aren't declared anywhere. But they sell quickly. Shops, informal sellers, and pop-up suppliers can undercut legal alternatives while still earning comfortably, feeding a demand that official regulations haven't fully addressed. For organised groups, the business case is simple. The product is cheap to source, whether shipped in bulk or repackaged through intermediaries. The demand is steady, the margins are huge, and because most transactions are cash-based, tracing the money becomes a challenge for investigators. Even when law enforcement clears shelves, the supply lines are so responsive that some outlets in Western Australia have been replenished within hours, restoring stock before customers even notice. These economic incentives don't just attract groups, they keep them expanding. And as profits climb, the effects ripple outward, shaping neighbourhoods, drawing in new players, and pushing communities into the fallout of a market that grows wherever the price gap leaves space. And in some parts of Western Australia, those ripple effects have already hit the streets in ways no one expected. When the underground trade began pushing its products beyond private homes and storage units, the consequences didn't stay hidden for long. By the end of 2025, regional Western Australia, places known for quiet nights and predictable routines, started seeing signs that something far bigger was moving through their streets. The town of York, home to roughly 2,400 people, became an early flashpoint. A new convenience store opened along the town's historic main street, but within 3 days, its windows were smashed and the interior torn apart. Days later, the situation escalated and the building was set on fire. Investigators linked the attacks directly to illegal tobacco activity, making it clear that organised elements were trying to intimidate or dominate small regional outlets. For a town that rarely saw this level of aggression, the shock was immediate and deeply felt. Not far away in Northam, trouble surfaced as well. A store on Fitzgerald Street was raided after authorities discovered illicit tobacco and vape products inside. Though the incident didn't involve the same violence as York, it sent the same message. The black market wasn't just creeping into regional WA. It had already arrived and it was using everyday storefronts as its foothold. Residents across these towns described a shift they weren't prepared for. Unfamiliar cars lingering after dark, closed shops with unexplained damage, and a growing sense that problems once considered city issues were now appearing on their doorstep. What had been small, steady communities were suddenly watching their surroundings with a new level of caution. Authorities recognised that simple patrols weren't enough. Under joint operations, including expanded compliance actions similar to Operation Maverick, health inspectors and experienced officers visited high-risk locations, removed illicit stock, and monitored businesses suspected of acting as distribution points. At the same time, proposed updates to state legislation aimed to give authorities faster, clearer powers to shut down shops tied to illegal sales before tensions escalated further. Local business owners also felt the impact. Some faced property damage, others suffered drops in foot traffic as customers avoided areas associated with trouble. The ripple effect showed that illicit trade doesn't just drain tax revenue, it reshapes entire communities. And to cut deeper into this network, investigators needed more than patrols and inspections. By the time investigators mapped out the family's operation, police understood something bigger was unfolding across the state. The seizures, the storage units, the cash, none of it explained why illicit tobacco and vapes were still appearing in such large volumes across Western Australia. One network had been exposed, but the broader market kept moving. It was clear the country was dealing with a trade built to regenerate quickly, regardless of how many doors officers knocked on. In early 2026, senior WA officials outlined a growing challenge. Illegal retailers were not operating in isolation. They were being supplied through flexible chains that shifted routes, swapped stock points, and changed couriers the moment pressure tightened. Some outlets were refilled within hours of inspections, suggesting coordinated logistics that extended far beyond any individual suburb. That speed forced a rethink. Raids could disrupt, but they couldn't dismantle an operation that could rebuild overnight. So the focus shifted from product to infrastructure. WA authorities pushed for new legislative powers to permanently close retailers caught selling illegal tobacco rather than rely on temporary compliance actions. Health officers, licensing units, and police began working in combined teams, targeting not just shop fronts, but the storage spaces, intermediaries, and suppliers feeding them. The goal was to shut off every route that kept the trade alive. The Illicit Tobacco National Disruption Group, backed by the Albanese government, connected the AFP, Australian Border Force, AUSTRAC, the ATO, and state regulators into a single intelligence stream. Instead of treating cases as isolated, the group mapped supply lines across borders, linking import patterns, freight movements, and suspicious financial activity. Money became one of the strongest pressure points. AUSTRAC analysts traced unexplained transfers, flagged bulk cash movements, and restrained accounts tied to large-scale vape and tobacco sales. In a recent joint operation, more than $1 million linked to unlawful vape distribution was frozen. a clear warning that the financial engine behind the trade was now directly in investigators' sights. The message was simple: seizing stock wasn't enough. To slow the black market, authorities had to strike at every layer that allowed it to restart. And as the pressure built, the case crossed into its final arena, the courtroom. The morning after the raids, the investigation shifted from cluttered storerooms and seized cash to the quiet, tightly controlled atmosphere of the Perth Magistrates Court. On the 16th of January 2026, the three family members at the centre of the case stepped into the courtroom for the first time, their routines replaced with legal restraints and looming uncertainty. What had begun as a financial and logistical probe was now entering the stage where every decision would carry lasting consequences. Two of the accused, the 47-year-old woman and her 68-year-old father, faced the most serious allegations. Both were charged with dealing in the proceeds of crime involving more than $100,000, an offence that carries a maximum sentence of 20 years under federal law. Prosecutors argued that the amounts found in their homes, along with the presence of cash counting machines, indicated more than poor accounting. It suggested sustained participation in a structured, cash-based operation designed to move illicit products and conceal revenue. The 26-year-old son-in-law stood before the magistrate on a different charge, failing to comply with a lawful police order after refusing to unlock his phone during his arrest at a Bunbury shopping centre. All three were granted bail, but the conditions underscored the seriousness of the case. None were permitted to leave Western Australia. They were ordered to avoid contact with one another entirely. Access to electronic devices was restricted, ensuring investigators could continue examining seized data without interference. A $50,000 surety was required in one case, while another accused was placed under regular reporting obligations due to health concerns. The message was clear: each person remained under close scrutiny as the investigation continued. Their next hearing was scheduled for 20th March 2026, where the prosecution and defence would begin testing months of collected evidence, from financial records to shipment data and digital extractions. Beyond this case, similar matters were appearing across WA courts, signalling a wider legal confrontation with a black market industry operating far beyond isolated storefronts. The seizure didn't just close one network, it exposed the weak points that allowed it to grow quietly in the first place. Once the case moved into the courts, attention shifted to the wider system: how illicit tobacco could slip through suburbs, regional towns, and ordinary storefronts without being stopped earlier. The response was no longer about catching offenders after the fact, but about rebuilding the structures that made these operations possible. In Western Australia, pressure fell on licensing rules that had allowed some retailers to trade with minimal oversight. Local councils pushed for the power to shut down shops faster when illicit stock was found, instead of waiting through long compliance processes. Insurers added another layer of pressure, warning that businesses caught selling illegal tobacco or vapes could lose their coverage, a financial risk many store owners couldn't ignore. Nationally, the focus tightened at the border. The Australian Border Force expanded scanning capabilities to detect tobacco concealed inside freight shipments, while federal agencies strengthened controls around excise-related imports. AUSTRAC began flagging unusual financial activity tied to bulk purchasing and rapid cash turnover, feeding intelligence directly into joint task forces before products reached distribution points. Beyond Australia, cooperation increased, with authorities in key transit regions giving investigators earlier insight into shipments moving through Southeast Asian and Middle Eastern routes. That meant more chances to intercept consignments before they ever touched Australian soil. In the end, what unfolded across these homes, storage units and courtrooms wasn't just a set of charges. It was a glimpse into how quietly an underground market can grow in the spaces no one pays attention to. $1 million in cash, tons of product, and months of investigation revealed just how long this network operated before anyone connected the signs. Will the new laws and enforcement tools be enough to slow networks that keep adapting? And how many similar operations are already working in silence, hidden in plain sight until the next raid breaks them open? Share your thoughts below. Like the video, subscribe, and thank you for watching.